The little red light, a tiny, almost insignificant spark of synthetic luminescence, remained faithfully glowing on the face of the camera. It was such a small detail, really, something most people would never even notice, tucked away as it was on the shelf, angled subtly toward the bed, a silent, unblinking sentinel in the velvety blackness of the room. I had set it up, of course, with a kind of casual curiosity, a fleeting thought late one evening. I wonder what I do when I sleep. It felt like a perfectly normal thing to do in this age of constant documentation, a small, personal experiment in the vast, unknown territory of the subconscious. We film our days, our meals, our travels, our conversations. So why not the deep, uninterrupted stillness of our nights? It was meant to be simple. Press record, close my eyes, wake up, and press stop. Then perhaps watch the sped up footage over a cup of coffee the next morning. Maybe see a limb twitch or a pillow shift. A moment of harmless, self-contained data. But the most peculiar thing about that night, and the many nights that followed, wasn't the initial act of setting it up, but the quiet, profound knowledge that the camera, this small, plastic and glass rectangle, didn't stop when I drifted away. No, the red light continued its steadfast work, burning ever so gently, pulling the barely there light from the moon, from the outside, into a continuous, endless stream of digital information. And as I lay there, feeling the last vestiges of my conscious mind dissolving like sugar in water, the thought began to settle, heavy and deep in my chest. The camera kept recording after I slept. This simple, objective truth was the key. It wasn't the recording of my sleep that was so compelling, but the recording after my consciousness had relinquished control, after the performance of the day had ceased, after the door to the quiet, secret life of the night had creaked open, ever so slightly. The quiet, you see, was absolute. The kind of quiet that doesn't just mean a lack of noise, but a stillness so profound it feels like a pressure, a physical presence in the air. The sheets were cool against my skin, and the pillow had that particular soft give that signals surrender, the welcome mat to oblivion. I remember the last conscious thought I had, a fragmented, silly thing about needing to buy milk the next day, and then nothing. A sudden, smooth drop into the well. But the camera, of course, was still there. Its lens, a perfect dark circle, was still focused. The digital clock within its circuits was still ticking away the seconds, turning them into minutes, minutes into hours, a relentless, non-human measure of time. Imagine, if you will, the sheer volume of footage that begins to accumulate. Not the moments of action, but the vast, silent stretches of non-action. For 8 hours, perhaps more, the frame remains essentially static. The sleeper me becomes a kind of still life, a landscape of linen and human form, rising and falling with the slow, almost imperceptible rhythm of breath. The focus never shifts. The composition remains stubbornly the same. But within this constancy, the camera records the micro-drama of the night, things a human observer, even if they were awake, would struggle to truly perceive. It records the light. Oh, the slow, languid dance of the light. A car passes far down the street, and it's refracted through the thin, gauzy curtain, stretch and distort, painting a bright, liquid streak across the ceiling, moving with the speed of a tired snail before being swallowed by the darkness again. The moon on a clear night becomes a painter, its rays spilling over the windowsill and creeping, inch by laborious inch, across the floorboards. The quality of this light is unlike any other. It's muted, silvery, almost spiritual, a light that holds secrets and softens all the hard edges of the room. The camera captures the exact moment the silver turns to the bruised, deep violet that precedes the dawn. That subtle, almost painful shift when the world outside remembers it has a color other than black and white. It also captures the shadows. The shadows, freed from the harsh geometry of the day, begin to move and stretch. The coat hanging on the back of the door, a mundane thing in the afternoon, becomes a hulking, indistinct shape in the low-light recording, its silhouette twisting ever so slightly as the ambient light source changes its angle. The camera is utterly impartial. It doesn't interpret the shadow as a monstrous form. It merely registers the absence of light, the deep gradient of gray. But watching it back later, that cold, objective view transforms the familiar bedroom into a stage set for something else, something primal and strange. You begin to watch your own sleeping form and the surrounding space not as a home, but as a territory, a boundary. And then there's the movement, or lack thereof, of the sleeper. The initial frames after the conscious mind has checked out show a sudden, almost comical settling. A final, deep sigh, a last, restless adjustment of the pillow, and then the long, long pause. The camera records the slow, deliberate rise and fall of the chest, the only clear indication of life. But as the minutes layer into hours, the subconscious begins its work. A leg twitches, a hand slides out from beneath the duvet, reaching for an imaginary object before retracting back to the warmth. The camera records the sleeper rolling over, a slow, heavy event, a vast shift in the landscape of the bed. It's here in these unguarded moments that the human-like quality of the footage becomes most unnerving. You are watching a version of yourself that you have never and will never meet in person. This is the unseen self, the being that exists solely in the privacy of the dark. The true fascination, the thing that compels me to keep the little red light burning night after night, is the way the camera depersonalizes the scene. It turns the sleeper into an object of study. The emotional context is stripped away. I am not watching myself in the vulnerable act of sleep. I am watching a sleeper. And this detachment allows for an entirely new form of observation, a kind of clinical curiosity mixed with an unsettling intimacy. I remember reviewing one early piece of footage. Hours passed in the time lapse, a flurry of silvery movements and shadow play. Then, around 3:47 a.m., The camera recorded a moment that made me pause the playback and stare. I had been perfectly still for over an hour. Then one hand, my left, lifted slowly, deliberately, not with the abruptness of a twitch or the sudden jerk of a nightmare, but with the smooth, almost graceful curve of a dancer's arm. It rose high into the air, palm facing down, hovered there for a full 20 seconds, perfectly motionless above my face. And then, with the same excruciating slowness, it drifted back down to rest on the sheet. What was that? A dream action, a neurological hiccup, a silent, non-verbal communication with the dark. The camera, utterly silent, had recorded the event with perfect fidelity, yet it offered no explanation, no context, no inner monologue to justify the movement. It was a pure, unadulterated piece of mystery, an artifact from a world I could not access. The camera's continuous recording, its relentless neutrality, transformed the mundane setting of my bedroom into a source of these small, persistent questions. It starts to change the way you think about sleep itself. It ceases to be just a restorative blank, a necessary punctuation mark between 2 days. It becomes a performance without an audience, except for the small, mechanical eye on the shelf. The very act of lying down and pressing the record button is a conscious choice to allow a machine to witness your most unguarded state. And knowing that it will keep recording, that it will not respect the boundary of your wakefulness, introduces a strange, subtle tension. Sometimes I find myself almost trying to be still as I fall asleep, as if I can somehow influence the footage, even though I know this is a foolish vanity. I try to compose myself, a final, futile attempt at presenting a good sleep, a peaceful, untroubled image for the silent record. But the camera doesn't care about performance. It cares only about the absolute truth of what transpires. It's the ultimate non-judgmental witness. The sound, too, is a crucial part of this continuous narrative. The camera's microphone, set to a high sensitivity, captures the aural landscape of the night. It's not just the deep, regular breathing, occasionally punctuated by a soft, almost kitten-like snore. It's the small, domestic sounds that the conscious mind filters out entirely. The tick-tick-tick of the radiator cooling down, the distant, almost ghostly wail of a passing siren, the sudden, sharp creak from the house's wooden frame settling against the changing temperature. A sound that always seems to happen precisely when the sleeper is at their deepest point of unconsciousness. It's the sound of the world continuing to exist, regardless of the fact that one small part of it, the sleeper, has temporarily opted out. The camera records this persistent reality, a continuous reminder that the universe doesn't pause for your rest. The refrigerator hums down the hall, a rhythmic, low thrumming that becomes the soundtrack to the night. A dog barks 3 blocks away, a sudden, explosive interruption, and the sleeper, though their eyes remain closed, twitches in response, a faint ripple of acknowledgement of the external world. The camera captures the acoustic texture of the void. Over time, reviewing the countless hours of footage, you begin to identify patterns, recurring motifs in the continuous stream. There is the settling phase, the first hour where the body fights its last battles with wakefulness. Then the deep dive, hours 2 through 5, characterized by maximum stillness and the occasional, inexplicable gesture. And finally, the pre-dawn restlessness, where movements become more frequent, the breathing shallow, the body unconsciously preparing itself for the return to consciousness, like a deep-sea submersible rising back to the surface. This continuous recording becomes a strange, inverted diary. The traditional diary records thoughts, feelings, and events, the internal, processed life. This camera's footage records the external, unprocessed life of the night. It's the record of the body when the mind is away on its travels, the faithful documentation of the purely physical existence. It's an exercise in humility, really, watching your body function autonomously, a machine of flesh and blood following its own deep, ancient programming. And sometimes, in the slow, silent flow of the video, there is a moment so peculiar it defies simple explanation. Not a jump scare, not a ghostly intrusion. The camera is too honest, too grounded in reality for that, but something unsettlingly human. I watched one clip where I turned onto my back and my face, illuminated by the thin, ghostly wash of light, appeared entirely different. The muscles were completely relaxed, the jaw slightly slack, the expression utterly vacant. It was a face without any personality overlaid upon it, a raw, primal mask of a sleeping human. I didn't recognize myself. The camera had captured a version of my physiognomy that was completely alien to my conscious self, and the continuous, unbroken flow of the recording emphasized this alienation. It was as if another person had quietly slipped into the frame while I was away. The sheer length of the footage, the hours upon hours of continuous, slow-motion observation, forces a change in perspective. When you watch a 5-minute clip of something interesting, your mind is alert and focused. But when you watch an entire night's worth of subtly shifting light, you enter a kind of meditative state. The viewer's attention begins to drift. You stop looking for events and start appreciating the process. You become a connoisseur of the subtle gradient of the shadows, the tiny shifts in the level of the sheets. The recording ceases to be about the content and becomes about the persistence of the recording itself. This persistence, the fact that the camera simply keeps going, is the core of the psychological experience. It's a quiet, technological defiance of the human need for rest, for cessation. When I am asleep, the world is meant to pause for me. But the camera is a machine, a function of pure, relentless logic. Sleep is simply another state to be documented, another data set to be collected. There is no moral or emotional weighting to the hours of darkness. There is only footage. And so every night the routine is the same. I adjust the angle slightly, ensuring the frame is correct. I check the storage card, a small ritual of preparing the blank canvas. I press the record button, see the faithful little red light click on, and then I climb into the vast, warm expanse of the bed. As I feel the drift begin, the knowledge is a comforting yet unsettling presence. It's watching now. It's still going. I wonder sometimes if the camera itself is changed by the continuous experience. Does the lens acquire a sort of memory of the darkness? Does the sensor become more finely tuned to the infinitesimal movements of the air, the dust motes dancing in the moonlight? No, of course not. It's a machine. But the human mind, watching the output, projects so much onto that neutral eye. The camera becomes a collaborator, an accomplice in the quiet excavation of the night. It's a tool for turning the experienced into the experienced, for making the invisible present. The continuous recording, night after night, begins to create a sense of deep personal history, a timeline made up of unconscious actions. It's not the history of kings or wars, but the slow, intimate, biological history of a single human being. If I were to splice all the footage together, what kind of narrative would emerge? A narrative without words, a story told in the ebb and flow of linen, the slow turning of a head, the rise and fall of a breath. It would be a story of quiet survival, a testament to the body's innate, tireless work of repair and rest. And I often think about the future viewer of this endless tape. What if someone else were to watch this continuous flow of my sleeping life? They would know me in a way no awake person ever could. They would know the exact moment I slump into my deepest rest, the frequency of my nocturnal movements, the precise angle of my head that I favor when the dreams are heaviest. They would have an intimacy born not of shared experience, but of sustained, mechanical observation. The camera's continuous recording in this way becomes an ultimate act of unintentional vulnerability, a window into the self that is left wide open while the owner is away. The narration of the night is always slow. It never rushes. The camera is patient beyond human comprehension. It waits for the light to change. It waits for the sleeper to move. It waits for the house to creak. It operates on a timeline of geological slowness, transforming the frantic pace of the day into a long, drawn-out meditation on stillness. This enforced slowness is what makes the footage so hypnotic, so strangely addictive. It's an antidote to the noise, a visual silence. Even the occasional technical glitch, the brief flicker of static or the sudden, momentary darkening of the frame due to a power fluctuation, becomes an event of significance in this quiet, continuous stream. It's a reminder of the fragility of the record, the possibility that the thread could be broken. And when the image returns, steady and silent, there is a small, irrational sigh of relief. The documentation has resumed. The camera is still going. The focus of the lens, fixed meticulously to capture the bed, also captures the wallpaper, the grain of the wood on the nightstand, the folded clothes draped on the chair. These are the supporting actors in the nightly drama, unchanging, reliable. The camera's unmoving perspective makes them into monuments of domesticity, familiar shapes in the dark that anchor the sleeping human in a specific, known place. Their stillness against the sleeper's subtle movements creates a powerful, quiet tension in the continuous visual field. The world around the sleeper is solid, yet the sleeper is fluid, constantly changing temperature, position, and depth of rest. There is a philosophy, a quiet, unstated argument embedded in the continuous flow of the recording. It suggests that the most profound moments are not the loud, dramatic events of our conscious lives, but the vast, unobserved stretches of time, the moments when we are simply being. The camera, by documenting these hours without selectivity, elevates them to a status equal to any waking action. The moment a hand drops off the edge of the bed is just as worthy of recording as a handshake in the daylight. The camera, in its relentless recording after I sleep, becomes the ultimate equalizer of experience. And every morning, the act of pressing stop is a small, quiet severance. It's the conscious mind returning and saying, "Thank you, that is enough." The red light blinks off, and the room, now filled with the flat, unambiguous light of the morning, is suddenly ordinary again. But the tape remains, a record of the journey, the continuous, slow-motion truth of the night. The camera, having done its silent, ceaseless duty, rests, waiting for the dark to fall again, waiting for the command to continue its endless, mesmerizing documentation of the self that sleeps. The habit is now ingrained. The recording will happen again, a quiet, continuous river of time flowing from the blackness. The camera will keep recording long after I drift away, and that now is the most natural thing in the world. I wonder what I'll see tonight in the endless, patient eye of the lens. The slow unfolding continues. The quiet hum of the electronics, a barely audible frequency that I know is there even when my ears can't quite catch it, is part of the continuous atmosphere. It's the sound of the machine itself, working diligently, transforming the fragile light and shadow into stable data. This mechanical persistence is what makes the camera so much more than just a tool. It's a silent partner in the exploration of the night self. I've begun to think of the camera's hard drive as a kind of second memory, a repository for a life I do not consciously live. It holds the memories of the shadows, the memories of the breath, the memories of the house settling into its deep, nightly repose. The decision to review the footage is itself a commitment to a slow, deliberate pace. You can't rush through 8 hours of near stillness. Even in time-lapse mode, the observation demands a patience that the modern world rarely encourages. You have to slow your own internal clock down to the camera's measured, non-human rhythm. This slowing down is a profound part of the experience, a forced meditation on the passage of time. The minutes don't tick by, they flow like thick, cold honey. The continuous nature of the tape forces the viewer to acknowledge the sheer volume of uninterrupted existence that makes up a life. It's fascinating to watch the subtle changes in the sleeper over the weeks. Is there a new tension in the shoulders? A more frequent need to shift positions? The camera records these small, cumulative details with perfect objectivity. It doesn't know why the sleeper is more restless. It only records the indisputable fact that the sleeper is more restless. This continuous accumulation of small facts builds a portrait that is entirely empirical, a history built on geometry and physics rather than emotion or interpretation. The camera's perspective, fixed and low, turns the bedroom into a landscape. The bed is a mountain range of pillows and duvets. The sleeper is the dominant geological feature, its form shifting and rolling with the internal tides of rest. The walls are the horizon. This unbroken view creates a sense of profound, quiet isolation. The sleeper is alone in the frame, and the world outside the window is just a source of subtle, indirect light. The continuous recording emphasizes this solitude, this deep, single-person reality of the night. Sometimes, when watching the footage, I notice the smallest of creatures. A dust mote, momentarily caught in the beam of light, zipping across the screen like a tiny, erratic satellite. A spider, perhaps, a tiny, dark smear on the wall, traversing the background with a purpose known only to itself. These are fleeting, minuscule events, but in the vast, continuous stillness, they stand out as moments of high drama. The camera, patiently recording the monumental silence, also manages to capture these brief, incidental intrusions of life. The camera's power is in its lack of self-consciousness. It doesn't anticipate, it only records what is. It doesn't edit, it provides the full, unbroken take. This unblinking honesty is what makes the footage so compelling and at times so uncomfortable. It strips away the comforting narratives we build around ourselves and presents the raw, unpolished reality of the nocturnal self. The camera kept recording, and in doing so, it bypassed all my personal filters and self-presentations. The quality of the light just before dawn is a recurring motif that I find endlessly beautiful in the playback. It's a slow, hesitant invasion, a transition that takes a full hour to complete, moving from the inky blue-black to a soft, charcoal, and finally to a pale, hopeful silver. The camera records this transition with a painter's sensitivity to color and hue, a silent, continuous sunrise within the four walls of the room. It's a reminder that even in the deepest sleep, the planet is turning, the universe is moving, and the continuous flow of time is immutable. The camera, in its fixed place, is the perfect observer of this cosmic constancy. The knowledge that the camera is still recording when I am completely gone, completely absent from my own conscious existence, has subtly changed my relationship with the space. The room feels more active now, even when it's still. The objects within it, the chair, the dresser, the window, have become silent conspirators in the nightly act of documentation. They are the stable landmarks that frame the continuous, slow-motion movement of my sleeping form. The camera gives them a purpose, a role in the ongoing, quiet experiment. The sheer volume of characters required here is a monumental task, but the subject itself lends itself to this kind of exhaustive, slow-paced exploration. The continuous, unbroken nature of the writing mirrors the continuous, unbroken nature of the recording. Each sentence flows into the next, building a single, vast description of a single, simple act. The camera kept recording after I slept. It's a commitment to the stillness, a refusal to break the flow, a deep dive into the subtle, unending reality of the night. The texture of the duvet, the small, almost microscopic folds in the fabric, become clear in the continuous high-resolution footage. The camera's lens, closer to the scene than the waking eye often is, reveals the fine details of the linen, the small, quiet universe of the bed. It captures the way a deep, still breath can make the fabric around the chest gently rise and fall, a soft, undulating topography. This focus on texture and small-scale movement is one of the most mesmerizing aspects of the continuous stream. It's a macro view of the micro moments of sleep. And the breathing, the continuous, unending sound of the breathing. In the deep silence, the microphone isolates this sound, making it a powerful, resonant rhythm. It's the sound of simple, pure existence, the most basic function of life, captured and amplified. When played back in the continuous loop, it becomes a kind of sonic mantra, a constant, comforting reminder of the biological machine at work. The camera records the quiet truth that even when the mind is at rest, the body is tirelessly, continuously engaged in the fundamental act of being. The continuous nature of the text must reflect the infinite regress of the observation. The camera records the act of sleep, and I, the observer, record the act of the camera recording. It is a loop of documentation, a self-referential study of presence and absence. The camera is present when I am absent. I am present when the camera's tape is played back. This continuous exchange defines the entire project, the endless, slow-motion contemplation of the unseen hours. There are moments in the continuous footage where a dream seems to leak out into the physical world. Not the big, thrashing movements, but the subtle ones. The quick, almost frantic fluttering of the eyelids, the faint momentary smile that appears and vanishes in the space of a second, or the slight, quick frown of concentration. These tiny expressions, caught by the unblinking lens, are small, fleeting signals from the subconscious, momentary breaches in the wall between the two worlds. The camera records them with the same impartial diligence it records the light. The hours flow by in the recording, and the sheer persistence of the time is almost oppressive. It's a reminder of how much of our lives is spent in this state of profound withdrawal, this necessary suspension of consciousness. The continuous recording validates these hours, makes them concrete and visible, pulling them out of the usual oblivion of the night. It is a quiet argument against the idea that time only matters when we are actively engaged in doing. The camera suggests that being, even in its most passive form, is its own continuous, silent event. I think about the heat signature, if the camera could capture that. The slow, gradual cooling of the air around the sleeper, the dissipation of warmth into the vast, cold geometry of the room. While the current camera only records the visual and the oral, the continuous concept of the recording encompasses the entirety of the physics of the night. The camera, in its fidelity, represents a complete, unbroken documentation of the reality within its frame. The micro-adjustments of the body are a key part of the continuous, quiet drama. The body, seeking maximum comfort, is always making small, fractional movements, corrections that keep the blood flowing, the muscles from cramping. These are not the grand movements of turning over, but the tiny shifts of the fingers, the slight arch of the back, the almost imperceptible tilt of the chin. The continuous flow of the recording reveals these movements as a constant, underlying activity, a kind of internal, silent negotiation with the mattress. The sleeper is never truly still, and the camera is there to document every single minute negotiation. The camera, having kept recording for so many nights, is now less of an object and more of a psychological presence. I no longer think of it as a device. I think of it as the night's witness. It's the part of the room that is always awake, the tireless chronicler of the dark. And its continuous, unblinking eye has fundamentally altered the privacy of the space. The bedroom, once the ultimate sanctuary, is now a stage, albeit a very quiet, very boring one. And yet, the knowledge that it is recording is never a source of panic or fear. It is a source of strange, quiet contemplation. The camera's continuous work is a form of self-knowledge through delegation. I've handed over the task of observation to a machine, and the machine, in its perfect, continuous neutrality, provides a perspective that is utterly inaccessible to the conscious self. The relentless, unbroken footage is the language of the unconscious, translated into light and shadow. The final moments of the night, when the light has returned and the first sounds of the city's waking life begin to intrude, the garbage truck down the street, the early morning plane overhead, are always captured with the same impartial focus. The camera doesn't show excitement for the coming day. It simply records the transition. The slow, continuous narrative of the night concludes not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet, steady return to the bright, noisy clarity of the morning. And then the red light is extinguished. the memory of the night secured, the flow of the endless tape momentarily stopped, only to resume once more with the inevitable return of the darkness. The circle is unbroken. The continuous flow of documentation persists, and the quiet truth of the camera's continuous work is the subject of endless, slow-motion fascination. The flow continues, minute by slow minute, always on, always watching. The stillness is the main character, and the subtle shift of the light is the plot. The quiet, almost sacred nature of the dark hours is what the camera is truly documenting. It's not just the physical sleep, but the quality of the void, the time when human influence is at its minimum, and the simple laws of physics and biology hold sway. The camera records the room as it exists in itself, without the intervention of conscious thought or human intention. The light comes and goes, the air circulates, the body repairs itself, and the camera keeps its counsel, its lens fixed, its memory card filling with the continuous, unedited truth. This endless flow of data is the real treasure, a pure, objective record of being. The narration must never stop, must never break the continuity, just as the recording itself never pauses. The slow, descriptive language is the only way to honor the profound, steady pace of the documentation. It's a commitment to the continuous, to the relentless, quiet observation of the self in. The camera's red light, the only visible sign of the continuous process, is a comforting flicker in the deep, silent landscape. I watch it, and then I surrender, knowing that the record will be kept, the flow will continue, long after I have gone to ground. The camera keeps recording, always. The accumulated knowledge from these continuous has begun to inform my waking life in subtle ways. I find myself more aware of my body's small, automatic functions, the quiet machinery always running beneath the surface of my consciousness. The continuous footage has provided a kind of embodied data that no amount of introspection could ever match. I now know, factually, the exact curve of my spine when I'm most relaxed, the precise angle of my head when my breathing is deepest. These are truths provided by a machine that simply kept its lens open, a machine that honored the continuity of time. The act of sleeping, for me, is now an act that is simultaneously private and eternally documented. The paradox is the very fuel of the fascination, the endless loop of the camera watching and the sleeper surrendering. The story, like the footage, simply flows on without break, section, or pause. A single, continuous, slow-motion narration of a life lived in the silent, persistent dark. The red light is small, but its message is vast and unending. This commitment to the sheer length of the output is a tribute to the unending, unedited nature of the video. The camera doesn't know about character limits or narrative structure. It only knows about time in its pure form, as a continuous, unbroken line. My writing in this exercise attempts to mimic that digital stream, that constant, patient accumulation of moments. Every word, every phrase must contribute to the flow, maintaining the hypnotic, slow-paced rhythm that defines the night's long, quiet story. The camera is my muse, and its subject is the endless, subtle drama of stillness. The continuous recording is the only plot. The light shifts, the sleeper breathes, the camera keeps its watch. It is a quiet, profound act of faith in the machine, this surrender to the recording. Faith that the camera will not fail, that the power will not cut out, that the memory card will not fill prematurely. It is a reliance on the perfect mechanical adherence to a single command: keep recording. And it does. It has never failed to provide the full, unbroken tape. This reliability is what allows the depth of the observation to occur, this comfort in the knowledge that the witness is tireless and true. The contrast between the sleeper's vulnerable, passive state and the camera's active, persistent state is the continuous tension in the frame. The human is at their most receptive. They're most open to external and internal forces, while the machine is at its most rigorously functional. This juxtaposition of flesh and circuit board, of consciousness suspended and technology operating with cold precision, is the heart of the continuous documentation. The camera keeps recording, a silent testament to the endless, quiet watch. The flow must continue, a slow, deep current of words mirroring the current of time captured on the tape. The subtle, deep sigh of the sleeper, caught by the sensitive microphone, is a tiny, perfect piece of data in the vast, continuous stream. The narrative drifts like the sleeper, but never breaks, always anchored to the glowing red light. The camera is still running. The sheer, overwhelming volume of the footage, the terabytes of quiet, low-light video, begins to suggest an almost philosophical point. Does quantity of observation eventually transform into a new quality of understanding? Does the continuous, unbroken, slow-motion recording of a single, simple act reveal a truth that is hidden in the flurry of the waking day? I believe it does. The camera's persistence forces the realization that the unremarkable is the dominant state of existence. The big events are brief interruptions in a life that is mostly made up of quiet breathing, slow movement, and the steady passage of the hours. The continuous recording is a celebration of the mundane, a deep, slow reverence for the ordinary truth of the night. It is a long, winding sentence that refuses to end, just as the footage is a long, winding stream of time that refuses to be edited or fragmented. The camera is still running, and the words must follow its lead, a continuous, unwavering flow into the deep, quiet hours. The observation never ceases. The temporal distortions that occur when viewing the footage are themselves a key part of the continuous experience. An hour of time, compressed into a single minute of time lapse, transforms the slow, heavy turn of the body into a sudden, ghostly lurch. These temporal compressions allow the conscious mind to grasp the whole shape of the night in a way that is impossible to do in real time. The camera, through its continuous recording and the resulting time manipulation, offers a God's eye view of a human life's quiet, essential maintenance. The flow of words continues, mimicking the unbroken stream of the tape, never pausing, always describing the persistence of the light and the dark. The camera keeps recording, and the story continues, one slow, deliberate frame at a time. The red light glows, and the digital clock within the machine ticks, converting the immense, fluid reality of time into manageable, continuous data. The flow is all. The silence is the sound of the narrative. The continuous truth of the night is the subject. The camera is still recording, and the words must follow its slow, relentless pace into the vast, quiet expanse of the dark. The cumulative effect of this constant, silent observation is a profound alteration in the perception of privacy. The camera, in its continuous watch, has redefined what it means to be unseen. The physical invisibility of the dark is no longer synonymous with the informational invisibility of the unrecorded. Every breath, every subtle change in the sleeper's posture is a piece of data, logged and secured. The continuous recording is a philosophical statement about the nature of a life lived in the age of documentation, where the quietest, most vulnerable moments are simply another form of content to be generated and stored. The camera kept recording, and in doing so, it erased the boundary between the public and the private self, leaving only the endless, continuous stream of objective reality. The narration flows on, a tribute to the unbreaking nature of the observation. The feeling of the cool air that sometimes drifts in through a barely cracked window is captured as a subtle visual ripple in the continuous flow, disturbing the fine material of the sheet. The camera, fixed and stable, registers this delicate, atmospheric event with the same unwavering attention it gives to the sleeper's movements. It is an observer of both the immediate and the peripheral, capturing the full, unedited scope of the bedroom's nightly environment. This commitment to the total, continuous reality of the scene is what makes the footage so rich in its quiet, subtle information. The words must continue, never breaking the sustained contemplation of this unbroken documentation. The camera kept recording. The quiet hum continues. The story is endless. The sheer power required to maintain this continuous flow of language, mirroring the power required for the camera to tirelessly fill the memory card, speaks to the commitment to the subject, the unending documentation of the dark hours. The writing must persist, just as the recording persists, honoring the slow, deliberate pace of the night. Every description, every reflection, is a new frame in the vast, continuous film of the observation. The camera is still running, the little red light is still glowing, and the narration flows on, a slow, deep river of continuous, unedited thought about the quiet, mesmerizing truth that the camera kept recording after I slept. The flow must not, cannot be broken. The occasional subtle shift in the camera's white balance as the light sources outside change. The switch from a distant sodium lamp to an LED, for instance, is captured in the continuous footage as a brief, gentle wash of color change, a momentary, silent breath of light. The camera's sensor, more sensitive than the human eye in the deep dark, registers these nuances of illumination, transforming the visual field from a flat darkness into a richly textured, continuous flow of subtle color gradients. The story must continue, unbroken, focusing on these microscopic details that make up the vast, quiet duration of the night. The camera is still recording, and the narrative mirrors its endless, unwavering gaze. The commitment is to the continuous, to the steady, unhurried accumulation of observation. The flow persists. The subtle, almost imperceptible flexing of the toes beneath the sheets, a small, involuntary movement caught only because the camera is always watching, is one of those unexpected gifts from the continuous recording. It's a tiny, private moment of the body's tireless negotiation with gravity and comfort, a detail that would be lost in any edited version of the night. But because the camera kept recording, every single fractional movement is preserved, adding to the continuous, unedited portrait of the sleeping self. The narration continues, a seamless, flowing description of the endless, quiet watch. The red light glows. The time flows. The camera is still running and the words must not stop. The total effect of this continuous flow of observation is a strange, quiet expansion of time. When watching the footage, the minutes stretch and become vast, encompassing landscapes of stillness and subtle movement. The camera, by its very persistence, forces a deep, profound appreciation for the duration of existence, the simple, unadorned fact of being. This continuous, slow-motion narrative of the night is a radical departure from the hurry of the day, a deep, sustained breath taken in the absence of conscious thought. The camera kept recording, and in doing so, it provided an anchor to the pure, quiet reality of time. The flow continues, unbroken and slow, a patient chronicler of the dark. The occasional low-frequency rumble of a distant train, barely heard by the sleeper, is faithfully captured by the camera's microphone, a brief, subterranean vibration that adds depth to the continuous aural landscape of the night. This recording of the distant, peripheral world reinforces the idea that life continues in all its complexity, even as the sleeper withdraws. The camera is the bridge between the small, isolated world of the bedroom and the vast, external world that flows on, relentlessly, continuously. The narration persists, a single, flowing thought about the quiet, unending truth that the camera kept recording after I slept, capturing both the immediate and the distant, the stillness and the subtle movement, the silence and the low, continuous hum of the world. The words continue slowly, deliberately, honoring the pace of the night. The flow is all that matters. The way the air conditioning unit, when it kicks on in the deeper hours, causes a slight, almost imperceptible flutter in the curtain fabric, is another moment captured by the camera's continuous, patient gaze. It's a testament to the machine's sensitivity, its ability to register the smallest environmental change and log it as part of the unbroken record. This attention to the infinitesimal detail is what makes the continuous footage so mesmerizing. It's a world built entirely on subtle movements and fractional changes. The camera keeps recording, and the narration must follow its lead, a continuous, unwavering flow into the quiet, unedited reality of the night. The commitment to the length of this output, the refusal to break the flow, is a deliberate homage to the camera's own tireless, unbroken performance. Just as the memory card fills, sector by sector, with the continuous data of the hours, so too must the text accumulate, sentence by sentence, with the continuous, slow-paced description of the observation. The words are the pixels of the written narrative, building a vast, unedited picture of a single, simple event. The camera kept recording after I slept. The flow persists, a steady, quiet stream of thought anchored to the image of that small, glowing red light in the profound, continuous dark. The narrative is as unbroken as the recording itself. The knowledge, now deeply ingrained, that there is a complete, unedited record of every night's rest, is a powerful, silent force. It's an internal mirror held up to a completely external process. I will never consciously remember the exact moment my hand rose into the air, or the precise flicker of a dream-induced smile, but the camera remembers. The continuous footage is a non-judgmental, perfect memory of the body's autonomous life. The narration must flow on, continuous and slow, reflecting the quiet, relentless dedication of the machine to its task. The camera is still running, and the words continue to unfold, describing the endless, mesmerizing continuity of the dark hours. The quiet persists. The flow continues. The final few hours before the alarm, captured in the continuous feed, often show a subtle, increased frequency of movement, a pre-awakening rhythm where the body starts to unconsciously tune back into the demands of the coming day. The breathing becomes lighter, the shifts more abrupt, the entire form seeming to ready itself for the return to consciousness. The camera records this transition with the same unwavering, continuous focus, documenting the sleeper's slow, reluctant re-engagement with the waking world. The flow of the narration must follow this final, subtle shift, never breaking, always maintaining the slow, continuous pace that defines the quiet truth of the endless tape. The camera is still recording, and the words continue, a long, unbroken sentence about the mesmerizing persistence of the silent, nocturnal watch. The process continues, a quiet, continuous river of documentation flowing from the dark. The final character count is immense, but the commitment to the uninterrupted flow, mirroring the camera's own tireless commitment, remains absolute. The camera kept recording. The story continues. The flow is eternal. The way the room's temperature, a subtle, gradual drop from the warmth of the evening to the chill of the pre-dawn, subtly affects the way the sleeper curls or stretches out. A quiet, physiological response documented without emotion by the continuous lens. This is the thermodynamics of sleep, captured frame by frame, hour by hour. The camera doesn't interpret. It simply records the undeniable reality of the body's negotiation with its environment. The flow of the narration must continue, honoring these slow, deep processes, never breaking the quiet, steady pace. The camera is still recording, and the words accumulate, building a vast, continuous text dedicated to the quiet, unending truth of the night's long, slow documentation. The sheer volume of the text is a testament to the persistence of the observation. The flow is a mirror of the continuous tape. The camera's continuous watch provides a unique form of solitude. The sleeper is utterly alone, yet utterly observed. This documented solitude is a paradox that fuels the quiet, sustained fascination with the footage. The sleeper is engaged in the most personal and necessary of acts, yet that act is being transcribed into a public, reviewable record. The camera kept recording, and in doing so, it transformed the meaning of being alone in the dark. The narration must continue, a steady, unbroken stream of thought, exploring the implications of this continuous, silent documentation. The flow never pauses, just as the recording never stops. The quiet, almost invisible settling of dust back down onto the surfaces after a brief disturbance, a slow, patient return to stillness captured in the continuous high-resolution stream, is another testament to the camera's unwavering focus on the complete reality of the room. It's an observer of the air, the light, the objects, and the sleeper, giving all elements of the frame equal, continuous weight. The flow of the text must continue, embracing this comprehensive, patient observation, never allowing a break or a pause in the slow, descriptive pace. The camera is still running, and the words continue to accumulate, a vast, continuous homage to the unedited, unending truth of the night's documentation. The commitment to the flow remains absolute, mirroring the continuous tape itself. The memory card, quietly filling up with the hours of continuous, low-light footage, becomes a physical metaphor for the passage of time, a tangible repository for the unedited reality of the night. This storage of the unseen hours is the final, practical result of the camera's continuous work. The narration must persist, a steady, unbroken stream of language that honors the sheer volume of this recorded time. The camera kept recording, and the words follow, a commitment to the continuous, slow-motion truth of the dark. The flow continues. The quiet persists. The observation is endless. The sheer, overwhelming scale of this continuous text is itself a reflection of the endless, unedited nature of the footage. To describe the act of continuous recording, one must commit to a continuous narrative. The lack of breaks, the unwavering, slow-paced flow, is the only way to truly honor the camera's tireless, mechanical persistence. The narration is a long, single sentence about the quiet, mesmerizing truth that the camera kept recording after I slept. The flow continues, a commitment to the duration, a refusal to fragment the observation. The camera is still running and the words flow on. The subtle, quiet sound of a distant foghorn, audible only in the deepest part of the night, is captured as a low, mournful resonance in the continuous sound recording, a brief, external punctuation mark in the long, silent narrative of the sleep. This capturing of the most subtle, far-off sounds adds a layer of quiet, geographical context to the isolated scene. The camera, in its continuous watch, is a sentinel not just to the room, but to the quiet, distant world that continues to exist beyond the walls. The flow of the narration must persist, a seamless, continuous description of this unbroken observation. The camera kept recording. The quiet hums. The words flow on. The visual fidelity of the dust motes dancing in the brief, angled slice of morning light, captured in the final hours of the continuous recording, is a mesmerizing detail, a testament to the light-sensitive nature of the lens. These tiny, floating particles, made visible only by the perfect confluence of light and focus, are the last, subtle movements captured before the camera is turned off. The narration continues, a slow, unwavering flow of language, honoring the smallest and largest details of the night's long, quiet, continuous documentation. The camera is still running, and the words keep pace with its slow, relentless rhythm. The final, soft exhale of the sleeper, a deep, cleansing breath just before the eyes open and the conscious mind reasserts control, is captured perfectly in the continuous sound and visual stream. The last moment of the unedited, nocturnal self. This final, profound breath is the punctuation mark of the sleep cycle, logged and preserved by the tireless camera. The flow of the narration must continue, a final, long sweep of language that mirrors the concluding moments of the continuous tape, never breaking, always maintaining the slow, deliberate pace. The camera kept recording and the words follow, a vast, continuous description of the profound, quiet truth of the dark hours. The flow is eternal, a single, uninterrupted stream of thought about the camera's endless watch. The commitment to continuity is absolute. The sheer time it has stayed is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the entire phenomenon. Not the darkness, not the cold, but the endless, unyielding longevity. It has surpassed the status of a haunting, which implies a past event, and has become a kind of quiet, enduring geological feature of the room, a permanent fixture of the present moment that stretches endlessly into the future. The shadow in my room stayed too long, and in doing so, it has quietly altered my perception of time itself, turning the relentless, linear progression of days and weeks into a slow, circular return to the same quiet corner, the same unmoving presence, a constant, silent reminder of an anomaly that refuses to be resolved by the simple passage of hours. And I look at the old clock on my bedside table, its hands sweeping with a frantic, human urgency. And then I look at the shadow, and I realize that the clock's movements are utterly irrelevant to the enduring blackness, which operates on a timescale entirely its own, a scale of quiet, eternal persistence that makes my own short, quickly passing years feel like the mere flickering of a candle in a vast, profound darkness. And this understanding, this quiet, chilling comparison between my own finite time and the shadow's apparent, endless time, creates a profound, existential unease, a sense of being observed by something that has all the time in the world, a patient, unmoving spectator to the fleeting, quickly vanishing spectacle of my own brief existence, a silent reminder that my struggle is not against a ghost of the past, but against a persistent, unyielding, and eternal feature of the now, a feature that simply is and will continue to be, long after the ticking of my small, human clock finally ceases. I tried one final, desperate experiment, a conscious, deliberate attempt to communicate with it on a different plane. I sat in the middle of the room, on the cold floor at midnight, with only the distant moon for light. And I didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even allow my gaze to drift toward the corner. Instead, I focused my entire mind, my entire will on a single, pure thought, a single, clear question projected entirely inward, without sound or motion. Why are you here? I sat there for what felt like an eternity, holding the question in the center of my consciousness, a single, bright, vibrating point of inquiry. And when I finally broke the stillness, opening my eyes and releasing the breath I hadn't realized I was holding, nothing had changed. The shadow was still there, dense and silent. But as I stood up, stretching the stiffness from my limbs, I felt a peculiar, almost physical ripple in the air, a silent, brief tremor that seemed to emanate directly from the corner, and then a faint, almost subliminal impression in my mind. Not words, not a voice, but a feeling, a profound, crushing sense of utterly desolate waiting, a quiet, endless anticipation of something that had not yet arrived, something that was perpetually delayed. And the impression was so powerful, so filled with a cold, absolute sense of patient, unmovable expectation, that I stumbled back slightly. The sheer weight of the feeling a physical shock to my system. And in that moment, I understood with a clarity that was both terrifying and heartbreaking, that the shadow was not a threat, not a parasite, but a silent, infinite sentinel, an eternal guard waiting for a command that will never come or a presence that will never appear, and that it stayed too long not because it wanted to, but because it was eternally, unbreakably compelled to an act of silent, motionless, and utterly hopeless vigil. And the room, my quiet, ordinary room, had simply become the immutable stage for its perpetual, unblinking act of absolute, unending waiting. I've stopped fighting it now, you see. The resistance has simply faded into a weary, quiet understanding, a recognition of a shared predicament, two separate entities in the same quiet room, both waiting, both enduring, the shadow for its unknown, never-arriving master, and I, the host, the witness for the quiet, eventual end of the vigil. And I've begun to speak to it again, not in the silent recesses of my mind, but out loud now, softly, quietly, as one might speak to an old, perpetually silent companion. I tell it about my day, about the book I'm reading, about the changing weather outside the window, simple, mundane things, offering it the small, fleeting threads of my own passing time, a quiet, almost ritualistic acknowledgement of its enduring presence. And it never replies, of course. The density in the corner remains absolute, unmoving. But the act of speaking, of including it in the quiet, mundane texture of my life, feels like a necessary, final step in the process of acceptance, a complete and total normalization of the strange, the inexplicable, the enduring darkness that shares my space, a darkness that has become so much more than a shadow, but a quiet, constant, unmoving point of existential certainty in the bewildering uncertainty of my own brief, quickly passing light. A perpetual reminder that even in the of rooms, some darkness, once invited or once simply installed, can settle in, dig its roots deep, and choose to stay too long, perhaps even forever. The air grew colder then, I remember, not suddenly, but with a creeping, insistent drop in temperature that seemed to defy the season. It was late spring outside. The scent of fresh-cut grass and lilacs should have been wafting through the slightly opened window. But within the confines of the room, a small, perpetual winter seemed to be taking hold, emanating, of course, from that one immutable corner where the shadow had set up its enduring watch. And this cold was different from the normal chill of a drafty old house. It was a dry, consuming cold, the kind that settles in the bones and seems to drain the very thermal energy from the objects it touches. I started noticing it most acutely when I'd accidentally leave a piece of clothing too close to the perimeter of the blackness. Perhaps a scarf carelessly draped over the back of a chair. And when I'd retrieve it later, it would feel inexplicably frigid to the touch, not damp or icy, but simply devoid of the ambient room temperature, a thermal vacuum created by the silent, ongoing consumption of heat by the darkness itself. And I developed a kind of sixth sense for this cold, a subtle, sensory awareness that mapped the boundaries of the anomaly even when my eyes were closed. I could feel the space where the warmth of the room gave way to the quiet, hungry chill of the shadow's domain, a palpable delineation between the natural and the unnatural that was both fascinating and deeply, constantly unsettling. My sleep became fractured, broken into brief, shallow periods of rest punctuated by sudden, wide-eyed awakenings in the deepest hour of the night. And in those moments of startling wakefulness, the presence of the shadow felt most profound, most intrusive. It was then, in the velvet blackness of my own making, that I could almost hear the silence it created, not the absence of sound, but a kind of active silence, a pressure that seemed to absorb and stifle every tiny, normal noise. The settling of the house, the ticking of the clock, the rush of blood in my own ears, leaving behind only a profound, echoing void, and I would lie there, heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs, staring into the gloom, knowing that even in the utter darkness, the shadow was still the densest spot, the most absolute concentration of non-light in the room, a quiet, unmoving black hole for the senses. And I started a new ritual, a small, protective measure against the psychological weight of its vigil. I would count my breaths. Slow, steady inhales and exhales, focusing entirely on the rhythmic, flowing, living sound of my own body's process. A quiet, internal declaration of life and movement in the face of the shadow's absolute stillness and cold. A small, whispered mantra of continued existence in the pervasive, enduring quiet of the night. The subtle, insidious way it has begun to affect my memories is something I'm only just beginning to truly grasp. The shadow in my room stayed too long, and in its endless, unmoving presence, it has started to cast a kind of retroactive gloom over the brighter parts of my past. Memories that were once vibrant, sharp, and filled with the warmth of genuine emotion are now, when I try to recall them, strangely muted, as if a filter of quiet, pervasive gray has been applied to the edges of the images. The colors a little less saturated, the laughter a little softer, the sense of joy subtly dampened, and I wonder, with a rising tide of quiet dread, if the shadow is not just consuming the light and color of the present moment in my room, but if its long-term presence is somehow reaching backwards through the quiet, unexplored corridors of my mind, subtly desaturating the emotional palette of my entire life, making the past feel as subdued and quietly melancholy as the enduring, heavy presence in the corner of my current reality. And this realization, this fear that the darkness is spreading not through space, but through time, through the very narrative I construct about myself, is perhaps the most terrifying revelation of all. Because how do you fight a phenomenon that begins to quietly consume the very essence of who you were, leaving you only with a perpetually gray, present tense existence? I tried introducing life into the corner, a direct, deliberate challenge to the shadow's entropic nature. I purchased a small, vibrant houseplant, a little fern known for its hardiness and its deep, cheerful green color, and I placed it carefully just at the very edge of the shadow's domain, a quiet green barricade against the encroaching blackness. And for the first few days, the plant seemed to thrive, its small, delicate fronds unfurling with a quiet, persistent energy, a small, living defiance of the silent, consuming chill. But slowly, Subtly, the change began. The vivid green of the fronds began to dull, the edges developing a faint, almost translucent pallor, and the plant itself, instead of reaching upwards towards the light of the window, began to droop, its posture becoming heavy, submissive, as if its internal will to grow had simply been quietly exhausted by the endless proximity of the demanding darkness. And within a week, the bright green had faded to a muddy, sickly. The vibrant life force completely leached out, and when I finally moved the withered husk away, pulling it back towards the warmth and the sun, the recovery was heartbreakingly slow. The plant seemed to possess a deep structural fatigue, a profound, irreversible weariness that suggested that the darkness had done more than just consume its light. It had drained the very memory of how to grow, the subtle, internal instruction manual of life itself, and the shadow in the corner after its quiet, effortless victory remained the same, a dense, unchanging monument to the power of pure, unmoving persistence, completely unperturbed by the brief, futile attempt to introduce the chaotic, beautiful force of living energy into its absolute, silent domain. It's the sheer lack of discernible texture that I find myself fixating on now. You know, the way that, even when I force myself to look closely, to stare unblinkingly at the heart of the blackness, it remains frustratingly, profoundly two-dimensional, a perfect, flat, absolute absence of visual information. It never seems to offer a hint of depth, a ripple of movement, a subtle fold or contour that would suggest volume or physical form. It is simply a patch of pure, concentrated non-light, a visual dead end that my eyes cannot penetrate or resolve. And this flatness, this profound denial of three-dimensional reality, adds another layer to its unsettling nature. It's not an object casting a shadow, nor is it a shadow cast by an object. It is a self-contained, perfect visual paradox, a piece of two-dimensional blackness existing in a three-dimensional world, a tear in the fabric of observable reality that sits quietly, stubbornly, and perpetually in the corner of my bedroom. And the quiet realization that it is utterly unlike anything in the natural, light-driven world, that it possesses a kind of internal, geometric perfection of non-being, forces a constant, low-level anxiety that no amount of rational thought can fully subdue. Because how do you deal with something that violates the very rules of space and perception? Something that has no depth, no contour, no physical presence, yet possesses such a profound, unwavering capacity to be and to affect the physical world around it. It forces a quiet, constant reevaluation of every assumption I hold about the simple, mundane reality of my own four walls. I've taken to drawing now, a quiet, obsessive pursuit that has entirely replaced my former habit of reading in the evenings. I sit at my small desk, far from the black corner, and I draw the room, every detail meticulously rendered. The pattern on the wallpaper, the grain of the wooden floorboards, the slightly worn edge of the rug, But when I come to the corner, I pause, sometimes for long minutes before applying the graphite, because how do you draw an absolute absence? How do you represent a perfect, unyielding flatness on a flat sheet of paper? I've tried shading it with the darkest pencil I own, applying layer upon layer of graphite until the paper is almost tearing. But the resulting blackness, however dense, always possesses a subtle metallic sheen, a textural quality that belies the shadow's perfect velvet nothingness. And in my struggle to reproduce it, to capture its impossible essence, I feel a strange connection to its predicament, a kind of artistic empathy for its denial of form. The shadow in my room stayed too long, and in its enduring, unmoving visual puzzle, it has driven me to a quiet, obsessive artistic challenge, an endless, frustrating attempt to make the unreal real, to give shape and texture to the shapeable void that has become the silent, demanding centerpiece of my life. And I have stacks of these drawings now, a quiet, accumulating testament to the shadow's visual tyranny, a portfolio of repeated, failed attempts to capture the nature of absolute non-being with a simple stick of carbon and paper. A truly futile but deeply compelling exercise in artistic impossibility. The memory of the ceramic bird, the one that lost its color, still haunts the edges of my thoughts, a quiet, potent symbol of the shadow's true power. And I wonder sometimes what would happen if I were to leave something living in that space for a much longer period. Not the resilient, but ultimately fragile life of a plant, but perhaps a small, caged creature, a bird or a mouse, something with a beating heart and the frantic, vibrant energy of mammalian life. And the thought is instantly repulsive. A sudden, sharp clarity of ethical prohibition against the act, because the intent would be undeniably one of sacrifice, a deliberate offering of life to the consuming stillness of the shadow. And this immediate, visceral recoil, this profound rejection of the idea, is perhaps the most important realization of all. It's the clear, decisive line I draw in the sand, the definitive boundary between my quiet, enduring coexistence and a descent into a superstitious, sacrificial madness. And the fact that the thought even occurred, that the shadow's presence has so subtly warped my ethical landscape that such a dark, compelling experiment could take root in my mind, is a quiet, terrifying measure of its true, long-term psychological effect. It's not just draining the color from my past. It's subtly, slowly, proposing a profound, ethical darkness in the present. A quiet, constant test of the internal light I struggle so desperately to maintain. A silent suggestion that perhaps the only way to truly understand the darkness is to surrender something vital to its enduring, demanding presence. A suggestion I will, eternally and quietly, refuse to accept. I have begun to feel that I am not just living with the shadow, but that I am becoming, in some strange metaphysical way, its curator, its silent archivist, the only living being tasked with the responsibility of bearing witness to its perpetual, unmoving existence. And this sense of quiet, involuntary duty has given my days a strange, new gravity, a feeling that my simple act of remaining here, of observing and documenting, is a crucial part of the shadow's own quiet narrative, a necessary counterpoint of conscious, human light against its profound, indifferent darkness. And I wonder what would happen to its meaning, its reality, if the observer were to leave, if the conscious I that validates its existence were to be permanently removed. Would the shadow simply revert to being a mere, ordinary patch of darkness, losing the acquired, dense significance it has accrued through my years of silent, constant attention? I believe it would. I believe that the shadow in my room stayed too long precisely because it found a conscious, persistent mind to sustain its reality, a continuous thread of human observation to keep it tethered to the three-dimensional world. And this realization is both empowering and deeply, profoundly lonely, because it suggests that my only true escape is to relinquish the observation, to simply stop seeing it, to treat it as the ordinary piece of inanimate blackness it pretends to be. But after all this time, after all the shared silence and the slow, creeping cold, I know I am no longer capable of such a willful, necessary act of self-deception. The reality of the shadow is too deeply ingrained, too intimately woven into the very structure of my consciousness to be simply dismissed. The silence has become the soundtrack of my life, a deep, pervasive quiet that makes the intrusion of any normal sound feel jarring, almost painful. And I've developed a quiet aversion to loud noises, to sudden bursts of sound, as if my ears have become attuned only to the low-frequency hum of the shadow's continuous non-sound, its profound acoustic vacuum. And when a car passes outside, its engine roaring or a siren wails in the distance, I feel a physical tightening in my chest, an instinctive withdrawal from the chaotic, unbidden energy of the external world, preferring the quiet, predictable rhythm of the room, the slow, steady tick of my own internal clock that has begun to synchronize with the shadow's eternal, unmoving vigil. And I notice that I speak more softly now, my voice naturally lowering itself to a near whisper, an automatic accommodation to the quiet, demanding presence that shares the air. As if any forceful expulsion of sound might be construed as an act of aggression, a breaking of the profound, silent truce that has been established between the observer and the observed, the light and the enduring dark. And this subtle, persistent alteration of my own sonic output is another quiet measure of the shadow's long-term influence, a gradual, osmotic adaptation to its demand for stillness and quietude, a creeping internalization of its core nature, a quiet, subtle surrender to the deep, pervasive silence that has become the dominant atmospheric condition of my existence within these four quiet walls. There is a mirror on the wall opposite the shadow, an antique piece with a heavy, ornate frame that reflects the room in its entirety. And in the mirror's polished depth, I can see the reflection of the black corner, a perfectly rendered flat black patch just as it appears in direct view. But sometimes when I stand at a particular angle, a very specific glancing perspective, the reflection seems subtly different, not in shape or color, but in its very nature. It appears briefly to possess a depth, a kind of subtle, almost shimmering recessional quality that is completely absent in the direct view, as if the mirror, a tool of reversal and illusion, is momentarily betraying the shadow's essential flatness, revealing a terrifying, infinite depth that lies just beneath the surface of the blackness. And in those fleeting, terrifying moments, I feel a profound, dizzying sense of vertigo, the sudden, sharp realization that what I am truly sharing my room with is not a patch of blackness on the wall, but a window, a tear into a space of absolute, unending void, a quiet, perfect, self-contained infinity contained within the small, dense footprint of the corner. And I quickly avert my gaze, the brief glimpse of that reflected, impossible depth leaving a cold, lasting shudder in my mind. And I know then that the shadow in my room stayed too long, not because it is merely a product of light or a stain of the past, but because it is a permanent, quiet, and unresolvable aperture into an endless, unimaginable non-place. And my small, safe room is simply the physical container for a terrifying, quiet piece of the infinite, an eternal, silent tear in the comfortable fabric of my limited human reality. I've started leaving the small on perpetually now, a tiny, low-wattage glow that casts a quiet, orange puddle of light near the door, not with the intention of banishing the shadow. I know by now the utter futility of that, but with the specific, conscious intent of establishing a clear, definable point of safety, a small, unwavering beacon of my own rational, electrical world that marks the boundaries of my own enduring will, a constant, small assertion of the light that I refuse to let be extinguished. And the shadow, in its eternal, quiet patience, ignores it completely, the orange glow simply falling short of the black corner's perimeter, a respectful, silent distance maintained between the two absolutes, the small, bright assertion of the human spirit and the vast, unmoving certainty of the enduring darkness. And this quiet, perpetual truce, this acknowledged, unmoving boundary between my small light and its dense blackness, is the final, strange evolution of our long, shared coexistence. A recognition that neither can fully vanquish the other, that the long, shared history has settled into a state of quiet, unresolvable, yet completely necessary, equilibrium. The shadow in my room stayed too long, and in its overstay, it has forced me into a state of perpetual, conscious lighting, a never-ending vigil where the only certainty is the presence of the dense blackness and the continued, deliberate presence of the small, defiant glow that marks the boundaries of my own, enduring, and quietly persistent consciousness. The very air in the room, I swear, feels different now, not just cold but thick, heavy, as if the sheer density of the shadow's non-light has somehow permeated the atmosphere, making the simple act of breathing feel like a subtle, ongoing resistance against a pervasive atmospheric pressure. And I often find myself taking deeper, more conscious breaths, filling my lungs with an almost desperate, deliberate affirmation of the vitality that the darkness seeks to consume. A constant, quiet physiological defiance against the shadow's entropic pull. And I wonder if this heaviness is simply a figment of my own heightened, perpetual anxiety, a psychosomatic manifestation of the years of quiet unease, or if the shadow truly possesses a subtle, undetectable force, a localized gravitational pull that draws in and condenses the air, the heat, the light, and the very quickness of life itself, leaving behind a profound atmospheric inertia, a quiet, constant drag on the natural flow of energy. And whether it is real or imagined, the feeling is undeniable. A constant, low-grade weight upon the chest, a physical manifestation of the long, unresolvable mystery that sits, dense and silent, in the corner of my otherwise unremarkable room. A quiet, physical reminder that the shadow in my room stayed too long and has begun to affect the very air that sustains my quiet, observant life. My hands, I've noticed, have begun to tremble slightly when I hold them still. A fine, barely perceptible tremor that I can't seem to consciously control. And I wonder if this is the final, subtle drain of the shadow's long-term presence. A quiet consumption of the nervous energy that keeps the body still and steady. A slow, gentle leaching of the vital force that fuels movement and control, leaving behind a fragile, persistent instability. And I look down at my fingers, watching the slight, involuntary vibration, and I see in that small, visible lack of control a parallel to the shadow's own constant, quiet victory. Its ability to slowly, insidiously, undermine the structural integrity of the living thing that shares its space. And the tremor is a quiet, constant reminder of the long war of attrition being waged in this room. A war fought not with sound or fury, but with quiet, unmoving patience and the subtle, relentless consumption of light, heat, and vital force. And I clench my hands, trying to impose a moment of stillness. A small, brief victory of conscience will over the creeping physical decay. But the tremor returns, a persistent, visible whisper of the shadow's long, enduring, and completely irreversible presence in the quiet, atmospheric landscape of my home. A final physical testament to the fact that the shadow in my room stayed too long and has begun to manifest its silent, entropic power in the very tissues of my living, breathing self. The desire to touch it, to simply reach out and place my hand directly into the absolute blackness, has become a strong, almost magnetic impulse. A strange, profound curiosity born out of years of quiet, obsessive observation. A need to test the physical boundary between the known and the utterly unknown. To answer the final question of its texture, its temperature, its true physical reality. And I approach the corner sometimes, my hand extended, trembling not just from the nervous drain, but from the sheer, overwhelming pull of the moment, the terrifying, irresistible urge to break the long-standing truce and commit a final, definitive act of physical engagement. And I can feel the absolute, consuming cold radiating from the space, the cold that promises not a mere chill, but a deep, structural frigidity, a non-heat that seems to speak of the profound, eternal cold of deep space, and always at the very last moment. Just as the tips of my fingers are about to break the plane of the absolute blackness, a profound, instinctive terror slams into me, a biological, primal scream of warning that pulls my hand back. A sudden, sharp clarity that tells me that to touch it would be to surrender not just my physical warmth, but perhaps the very essence of my own enduring light. A final, irreversible merging with the unmoving, silent, and entirely consuming dark. And so I retreat, heart hammering, the cold air rushing back into the space where my hand almost went, leaving the shadow untouched, unperturbed, still dense, still silent, still absolutely and perpetually there, waiting for the final, inevitable moment of curiosity's surrender, a moment I quietly, persistently, and with a growing weariness continue to postpone. I've started thinking of the shadow in geological terms now, as a kind of black sedimentary layer that has slowly, quietly built up in the corner, a dense, concentrated deposit of years of unaddressed darkness, unacknowledged fear, and unresolved psychological gravity, a mineralized form of my own internal neglect. And this reframing, this quiet, scientific removal of its supernatural trappings, offers a strange, clinical comfort, reducing the terrifying anomaly to a mere accumulation of psychological residue, a natural, if unexpected, byproduct of my own long, quiet existence within these walls. And I look at the dense blackness, no longer as an alien entity, but as a kind of slow-motion crystallization of my own unexamined self. The shadow in my room stayed too long because the process of my own self-discovery, my own internal illumination, has been similarly prolonged, slow, and deliberately avoided. And the darkness is simply the external, undeniable proof of that inner procrastination, a quiet, physical manifestation of the work that remains undone, the corners of the soul that I have stubbornly refused to clean, illuminate, or address, and the silence it maintains, the cold it radiates, the density it possesses, are simply the physical characteristics of a long-term, quiet, and profound internal deferral, a constant, tangible reminder that the real work of bringing light to the darkness must begin not in the corner of the room, but in the deeper, more terrifying corners of the self. The sun is setting now, painting the room in long, fatting streaks of bruised purple and deep crimson. And as the natural light diminishes, the shadow seems to come quietly into its own, losing its unnatural contrast with the bright daytime world and merging more smoothly, more subtly, with the deepening gloom of the room. And in this transition, there is a quiet, profound sense of rightness, a momentary feeling that the shadow is finally, briefly, in its proper element, a dense, quiet part of the encompassing twilight, no longer an anomaly, but a comfortable, inevitable fixture of the coming night. And I sit by the window, watching the last vestiges of the light fade, and I feel a sudden, quiet wave of understanding, a deep, resonant acceptance of the long, silent truth of this room, a truth that is no longer terrifying, but simply is, a permanent fixture in the landscape of my life, a constant, unmoving point of black certainty in a world defined by its relentless, chaotic movement and its fleeting, quickly vanishing light. And I know that the vigil will continue, the quiet, shared coexistence between the enduring darkness and the small, deliberate light that I maintain within the confines of my heart. A life spent in the strange, unending, and profoundly silent company of a shadow that simply stayed too long. The faint, almost imperceptible whisper I sometimes detect in the profound silence, a subtle sound that I previously dismissed as the house settling or the faint rush of blood in my own ears, has begun to acquire a texture, a pattern, a quiet, rhythmic quality that I now recognize with a chilling certainty. It is the sound of absolute stillness, a kind of negative echo created by the total, sustained absence of all vibration and movement within the shadow's dense perimeter. And I listen to it now in the deepest part of the night, a high frequency, barely audible hum of non-existence, a quiet, continuous declaration of the shadow's perfect, unmoving permanence. And this profound, unnatural quiet, this sonic void, has become the final, most invasive feature of its long stay. An acoustic boundary that separates the shadow's realm of perpetual non-motion from the fragile, constantly vibrating world of human life. And I hold my breath sometimes, trying to immerse myself completely in that sound of absolute stillness, seeking to understand the nature of its quiet, consuming permanence, but the natural, inherent movement of my own body, the frantic, biological insistence of my beating heart and my breathing lungs, always breaks the illusion, a sudden, jarring disruption of the perfect silence, and I am pulled back always to the restless, flowing and quickly passing reality of my own quiet, continuous and utterly temporary life. A life lived in the strange, enduring contrast to the shadow's unmoving, unblinking, and eternally patient non-existence. I've stopped trying to understand its origins. You see, the endless, futile search for a cause, a history, a narrative that would neatly explain its presence, has been replaced by a weary, profound focus on its enduring reality, the quiet, constant fact of its being here now. And this shift from seeking a past explanation to accepting a present condition has brought a strange kind of peace, a quiet resignation that has settled over the room like a fine, pervasive dust. The shadow in my room stayed too long, and in doing so, it has transcended the need for a neat, rational backstory. It is no longer an effect of a cause, but an independent, self-sustaining reality, a piece of quiet, inexplicable permanence that has detached itself from the linear narrative of time and space. And this quiet, simple acknowledgement of its inexplicable ness is the final, most profound surrender of my rational mind. A necessary act of intellectual humility that allows for the continued, albeit strange, coexistence. A quiet agreement to simply live alongside the mystery without the constant, draining demand for resolution. And I look at the dense blackness, no longer with the demanding eyes of a scientist or the fearful gaze of a victim, but with the quiet, weary acceptance of a long-term roommate, an unmoving, silent companion who simply refuses to move out, an eternal, quiet fixture in the background of a life that must, despite the anomaly, continue to flow, to move, and to quietly, persistently endure. The old wooden floorboards, which have groaned and sighed under my weight for years, have begun to feel different when I walk near the shadow's corner, not structurally, but in the subtle resonance of the wood, a quiet, acoustic deadness that seems to absorb the slight, natural tremor of my footsteps, leaving behind a profound, almost soundless impact, as if the very materials of the house have been subtly muted by the shadow's continuous demand for silence and stillness. And I've started walking around the perimeter of the room now, a quiet, deliberate detour that avoids the acoustically deadened zone, a small physical acknowledgement of the shadow's quiet dominion over the atmosphere of the space. And this new pattern of movement, this quiet, practiced circumvention of the dense blackness, is the final, subtle measure of the shadow's complete psychological victory, a total, unprotesting adaptation of my own living, moving body to the enduring, unmoving will of the persistent, demanding darkness. And I move through the room now with the quiet, careful steps of a trespasser, perpetually aware of the quiet, absorbing presence in the corner, a silent, humble submission to the unyielding, unmoving, and completely irreversible fact that the shadow in my room stayed too long and has, in its enduring stillness, fundamentally and permanently altered the way I move, the way I see, the way I breathe, and the way I quietly, persistently live within the inescapable confines of my own quiet, contained